The year is 2007. Halo 3 is at its peak popularity and is setting the stage for the competitive console scene. Players of every age are basking in the glory of their Xbox 360 as their PlayStation counterparts look on, not knowing what they're missing out on. It's truly a golden era.
He's one shot.
Fast forward to 2020 and Halo is nothing but a pebble in a large pond. Hi there, I'm Jace, and today we're going to break down what exactly went wrong with the Halo franchise. So let's talk numbers. Boasting $300 million in its first week, Halo 3 released to an insane amount of 1 million players online within its first 24 hours of going live. You might say, hey, Fortnite gets that almost every day, and you might be right. But what you need to understand is that this was in 2007, 13 years ago. In a time when internet sucked and gaming was in its infancy, this was absolutely incredible. You see, Halo at its peak popularity was nothing to scoff at. In the age before Twitch TV, Facebook Gaming, Mixer, and even before YouTube had achieved overlord status, Halo had an insane amount of exposure to the general public. It didn't matter if you were still in school or an adult, Halo was something that everyone knew about if you were even remotely interested in video games. To put it bluntly, Halo was what Fortnite is to today's kids and teens. A captivating form of entertainment, something that they looked forward to after a long day at school. A social experience that brings everyone together. So when did things start to go wrong? If Halo was so popular back then, what changed? Well, we need to consider a couple of things. At the time, Halo's only competition in the gaming world was with Call of Duty. COD was innovating the arena shooter genre at the time with the inclusion of things like sprint and enabling a class creation system that allowed character perks. On top of that, it seemed like COD was rapidly approaching Halo's popularity. Due to the exclusive nature of Halo being solely on Xbox, gamers from both consoles had exposure to the new competition. People were developing new tastes, it seemed like people wanted more innovation. And then one day, it happened. Halo Reach was released, and Halo's fanbase was shocked to discover that shortly after, Bungie were parting ways with Microsoft and moving on to their new independent game, Destiny. Bungie thanked everyone for their time and set sail onto their new venture, leaving Halo to the new devs, 343 Industries. People couldn't believe that after so many years, the lovable studio Bungie would just up and leave their masterpiece to a company nobody knew about. 343 was made up of some old members of the Bungie team, but it wasn't the same. People were skeptical, and rightly so, because their next two games, Halo 4 and the Master Chief Collection, ended as total disasters. Sources have said that 343 originally wanted Halo 4 to release on the Xbox One, but were pushed to start as early as 2009 for a release on the Xbox 360. In 2012, the game dropped, and shortly after, so did the entire player base. Here's some interesting statistics to consider before we move on. Halo 3 remained in the top 3 most played games on Xbox Live until 3 years later when Halo Reach was released. Halo 4 remained in the top 3 for 2 months until it fell out. Roughly a year after release, Halo 3 had a 1.1 million peak population day, which they called Bungie Day. Reach had a 900,000 peak Bungie Day after the same amount of time. Halo 4 clocked in at 20,000 people for its peak Bungie Day. Unfortunately, Halo 4 was a dumpster fire that nobody could really understand. The most common complaints from most people was that the game tried too hard to appeal to the COD fanbase. The COD players visited, sure, but left soon after. The Halo player base then felt alienated. The game felt way too different this time around. There was a create a class system, which ruined the idea of equal starts that Halo promoted. You could start with a BR, or maybe a DMR, or maybe a pocket shotgun? You want to drive a Warthog around? Sure, just don't be surprised if the other team spawns with plasma pistols and plasma grenades. And there were ordnance drops, similar to kill streaks where a power weapon or ability will spawn at your feet if you manage enough points. It generally made the maps feel devoid of power positions. The most laughable thing in my opinion were the abilities they added. Promethean Vision was an ability that gave you literal war hacks in the game. It was busted and a very strange addition. Strangely enough, the campaign was actually really good in Halo 4, and even most haters of the game received it very well. So, a year after release, the game was essentially dead in the water. With less than 20,000 people playing a day, it was safe to say that we were ready to move on. And then came the big boy announcement, the Master Chief Collection. The MCC was announced in preparation for the release of their new title, Halo 5, for the Xbox One. It would feature all the classic Halo games running on 60 frames per second with lighting upgrades. On June 9th, 2014, the game released and it was a total disaster. If Halo 4 was a dumpster fire, this was the Titanic. Shortly after the release, players were complaining about the fact that the matchmaking system wasn't working. It turns out there was a major issue plaguing the game's ability to find matches, an issue that wouldn't be fixed until 6 months later and still hasn't really been fixed to this day. Coupled with the numerous amount of bugs that still weren't fixed 2 years later, the community was in uproar. $60 for 5 classic games was an amazing deal, but the games barely worked. So with 2 failed releases, we move on to Halo 5. Now, personally, I think the idea of Halo 5's multiplayer was good. The execution is where they failed. The beauty of classic Halo games was that they were accessible to anyone. You could jump into any match-made game and run and gun. The mechanics were simple to understand too. You can jump, shoot, walk, and drive vehicles. If you wanted a more competitive experience, well then you can go check out the MLG playlist they had available in the menu. Halo 5, however, took this idea and turned it on its head. With the addition of new gameplay gimmicks, the game felt so disconnected to what older Halo players were used to that people complained that it wasn't even Halo anymore. They decided to make the game competitive across the board. Everyone had thruster packs, Spartan charge, ground pound, sprint, AR/pistol starts, clamber, auto stabilize, and you could now slide on the ground. It was inherently a sweaty game. Tryhards loved it, but unfortunately it alienated 99% of their user base. You couldn't just jump on for a relaxing game of Halo 5, you needed to be hunched over ready with caffeine in hand. It seemed like 343 were attempting to mimic what makes most competitive games so popular nowadays. If you've ever played a game of League of Legends casually, you could watch the competitive scene and understand what's going on. The same thing applies for games like Valorant, CSGO, Dota, Rocket League, etc. Not much changes between the casual gameplay and the competitive gameplay except for the skill gap. The overall game remains the same. I think this failed with Halo though, because from the ground up, the competitive scene was never like that. It was always separated in a different playlist. It also didn't help that the game falsely advertised what the campaign experience was going to be about. They essentially abandoned much of the Halo 4 storyline built up and went with a completely different storyline that many people expressed their frustration with. The writers for Halo 5's story weren't the same for Halo 4. It felt disjointed. They also added in a replacement for Big Team Battle, Warzone, which featured microtransactions with soft pay-to-win features. They removed split screen, added customization through rec packs that you could purchase or unlock after long playtime, and classic game types like Forge, Assault, King of the Hill, Griftball, and Infection were added later on in the game's release as free DLC. The art style was also quite awkward to look at, but that's just a matter of opinion. So there you have it. Halo has experienced many hardships over the past 10 years, with extensive changes made to the gameplay. What do you think about Halo in its current stage? Do you enjoy it? Leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. Cheers.